Episode number 79 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Robyn Johnson. Robyn is a functional medicine dietitian nutritionist. Her passion of using food and lifestyle as medicine found her after a personal battle and triumph with psoriasis. She specializes in helping women optimize their health and hormones by finding the root cause to their symptoms. Robyn runs a virtual private practice and is the co-creator of Her Hormones Academy, an online program for women who want to improve their health and hormones with food and lifestyle. Robyn believes healthcare should be individualized, and that starts with each person understanding how their body works and what their body needs to truly thrive. So welcome to the podcast, Robyn.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat.
So can you share your background and what inspired you to specialize in women's health?
Definitely. I am trained as a registered dietitian, so I practice functional medicine, but I went through all the conventional training to become a dietitian. And during that time, I was struggling with a number of health issues, one of them being psoriasis. So I was covered in spots all the time. And at the time, too, I was losing my period. So I went for 6 months without having a cycle. And both of these issues through the conventional route weren't addressed. I was on different medications. I was told I had PCOS. Nothing was really asked in terms of what could be causing this. And so I battled that stuff for on and off for 2 years. And eventually, when I was in grad school, I started asking those bigger questions. What could be the cause of this? And I started doing research on my own. Fortunately, I was at the right place at the right time. And I was at a school that actually had training for dietitians to learn about functional medicine. It was the first program of its kind in the country, and I happened to be there. So that's when I was introduced to that type of care, and I started asking those questions, started changing lifestyle habits, diet changes, looking at gut health, looking at stress and exercise, and ultimately within 3 months, my skin was clear, and I haven't had a psoriasis spot since. And then I also was able to get my period back, did not have PCOS, was able to get everything back in regular, and it's been that way since. So partly, school education and my personal story is what really led me to a functional medicine approach. And then I just loved women's health. It was through private or working with clients that I really learned that I enjoyed that area and just kept growing my education in that and have really enjoyed that niche.
That's amazing. It's really remarkable because I know that with psoriasis, it's actually a lot of people have such an uphill battle to turn that around. It's pretty amazing that you were able to do that. And do you know for sure that it was PCOS?
It was not PCOS. It was really hypothalamic amenorrhea. And at the time, they did all the blood testing, the ultrasounds, they did the conventional stuff. And I had all normal labs, a few cysts, but not, anything crazy, not the ring of pearls. And I even asked and called the nurse and said, can you explain why I'm being given birth control and metformin when my labs are normal and all I have is the lack of my period? And they just said that's just what the doctor recommended and the protocol. I didn't end up taking either, ended up getting my period back by making diet and supplement and exercise changes. So really, I don't think that was a proper diagnosis.
Wow. First of all, that's awesome that you actually took charge, because it's not very easy, especially when you're trying to figure something out and you're given a protocol from a doctor to take charge and listen to your own gut, which is so important, as we know. When you had hypothalamic amenorrhea, was it because of not eating enough or exercising too much?
It was a combination. So if we really look at the big picture, I had psoriasis at the time too, which is very, very much an inflammatory condition. And so that went on for 2 years. So I think the inflammation was playing a role. I was training for running half marathons with my dad. Definitely too much exercise and cardio, and also under eating for the amount of exercise I was doing. And I was in college. I mean, there's enough stress just right there too. So it was a number of things. And you're spot on with psoriasis being an uphill battle. It absolutely was. It was 2 years of me battling it before I actually started to ask those questions and kind of push back to the doctor recommendations. So I rolled at gluten-free. I rolled at all of the stuff I do
Right.
now in the
Yeah.
beginning, and it was really suffering that led me to be a little bit more open-minded to it all.
Yeah, because when you're in suffering, you'll do anything to try it out. And so it's obviously an autoimmune condition, which a lot of times it baffles a lot of people. Like, what do we do? I know that you just mentioned gluten. Gluten a lot of times causes reactions for many autoimmune conditions. What are some of the things that you did in order to modulate it or make it less inflammatory?
Yeah, I really had to look at it from a few different angles. So I mentioned the over exercising, under eating, looking at total stress load. Those were huge foundational pieces.
Hmm.
And then I had a lot of gut healing to do. So I did a stool test and looked at digestive health, which was very poor, candida overgrowth with my gut. So I did protocols to address that, like herbal protocols, antifungals,
Hmm.
and then an elimination diet. And so I'm all for experimenting. So the type of elimination diet that I did, I mean, none of this I was being guided on, so I didn't have any testing for that. I just experimented with that. But I took out gluten, dairy, chocolate, nightshades. I mean, alcohol. Like I did the probably the strictest version, and I did that for 3 weeks, and then started adding things in, and I just paid attention to what triggered things or what worked for me. At the end of the day, I have left out bigger categories like gluten, mostly because I know of the research with zonulin and I know the impact on gut and autoimmune conditions that that can have. And then ones that I leave out for the most part but can rotate in are things like dairy and nightshades. I typically minimize those, but I don't get a flare if I have them going out to eat or something like that. So it's really just been figuring out my tolerance and what
Hmm.
makes me feel best. And that kind of is an ongoing experiment.
And what did the stool test show you?
Yeah, so that showed candida overgrowth and poor digestive ability, so likely low stomach acid at the time. And I've done stool tests since, but that
Mm-hmm.
was the first one I did when really looking at the whole psoriasis picture.
Right. And typically functional medicine is just it's about testing, figuring it out, and also figuring out like what's the root cause versus treating the symptom.
Yeah, it's definitely asking root cause questions. And while I mentioned the testing of gut, and that was a big part, I don't want to downplay the stress and the exercise because that is absolutely was adding to the inflammation load, and that was a big part that I had to address. It's not as sexy as the gut stuff that a lot of people want to talk about, but the lifestyle component was huge for me too.
Yeah, and the stress. I mean, the stress is huge. I've had more symptoms in college than I ever remember, and I remember that's really when my symptoms began. Well, probably before when it comes to menstrual cycle, but same thing. I went and was given the pill. It seems to be the protocol.
Yes, seems to be the big band-aid.
Yeah. And so as far as hormones go, there's so much imbalance going on right now. Why do you think we're seeing so many of those cases?
Yeah, it's going to be similar to everything that I just mentioned for me. And I think it's starting at such a younger age too. So even,
Mhm.
preconception, moms who are getting pregnant, we have to be considering the impact of our egg quality and sperm quality and what that does for generations and the
Mhm.
epigenetic component. So I think it starts much earlier, which is why we see chronic diseases start so much earlier in kids. But then, what are kids starting out on with their diet? What are
Mhm.
they exposed to in terms of environmental toxicants? What is the activity like or play
Mhm.
versus video games and sedentariness? So there's so many factors, and I think it's compiling things on is what adds to when or if a condition will present.
It's interesting that you're talking about kids and play because when I was in school, one of the Chinese doctors, he was teaching about for the spleen and the stomach, which are the core of digestion. It's earth. And one of the things that they do is actually it's important for kids to have digested some almost like dirt or playing with dirt and having that connection because it helps with the gut bacteria. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I feel like we lose because everything's so sanitized and we're so afraid to have the kids play in the dirt and get dirty. And it's kind of an interesting thing that we don't always think about, but it's
Oh,
part of nature.
yeah, spot on. And we actually have studies that show kids that are raised on dairy farms or kids that are grow up in an environment with a dog have less less likely to have conditions like eczema. So that, I
Hmm.
mean, that is impacting the gut microbiota, and that's a huge part of immune system and total body health. So you're right. I mean, exposure to toxicants is one thing, but then not getting exposure to bacterial diversity is a huge part
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah, huge. And then we talk about toxicity and plastics and
Mhm.
hormone confusion because your body doesn't know the difference between xenoestrogens and real estrogen. There's definitely so many different aspects.
Yeah, and that's concerning me too for the younger generation. I mean, it's certainly a concern for adults as well, but we see young women getting their periods so much earlier and getting breast development so much earlier, and we have to ask the question of, well, why is this happening? And
Mhm.
diet for sure plays a role in the high amounts of processed foods that kids are eating, but then exposure to xenoestrogens and estrogen mimickers that are impacting women or young women and young boys, impacting the hormone load before they're even fully in puberty, which is really concerning for their adult health as well.
Right, because that's the foundation of their
Hmm.
adulthood. And another question I wanted to ask is because there's a lot of different opinions on this. What are your thoughts of phytoestrogens, which are natural estrogens in plant-based foods?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person and what's
Mhm.
going on with their total estrogen load and their estrogen metabolism. It also varies with time of life. Are they premenopausal, perimenopausal, postmenopausal? And this is with anything, right? We have to look at the person and the individual and not make general, this is right, this is wrong statements. It
Mhm.
always comes back down to the person.
Yeah, and also liver health as far as detoxifying excess estrogen.
Yeah, liver health, gut health. Are we sweating? How's our lymphatic system moving? I mean, there's so many layers to detoxifying and how we're binding up things within our liver and what nutrients we're using to do that is just one part of it.
So when you have somebody come into or start a session with you, where do you begin?
I start by asking them a lot of questions, way too
Mhm.
much about their life. Really, though, that is step one, is just a detailed assessment. I spend 60 to 90 minutes with someone on an initial assessment, and I want to know anything and everything they can tell me. And oftentimes people start with talking about what their current problem is or their symptoms are, but I want to know before that, when did it start? Because
Mhm.
we're looking deeper into the root cause. And honestly, that could go back to childhood, and that could
Right.
be environmental triggers, it could be diet triggers, it could be trauma, it could be exposure to things like mold. It's really, we're looking at their whole life and trying to find what triggered the cascade here and how do we start to unwind it.
And what type of tests do you do?
Yeah, that really varies. I would
Mhm.
say I do a lot of stool testing. I do a lot of the Dutch test, which is the dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. I
Mhm.
do mycotoxin or mold testing. Nutrient testing is needed. Sometimes food sensitivity testing, it's not a common one, but there are certain cases or conditions where it can be helpful. So yeah, it really just depends on the person, but there's a wide variety that we'll pull from depending on what's going on.
And as we just spoke, I pretty much would imagine what your answer would be on this because there's a lot of fad diets, and it seems to be like this one size fits all kind of thing.
Mhm.
And you just mentioned something that's very important is that we're all individuals, and there's no way to that we can generalize. I guess we could generalize when it comes to plastics. It's bad for everybody.
Mhm.
And there's certain things like that, but what are your thoughts about like intermittent fasting, keto, paleo? Like when people come in and tell you I'm doing keto.
Yeah. My first question to anyone would be, what's your goal behind that? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's an important piece to ask so that we as a practitioner know their deepest why. Where are they coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes they're really trying their best to heal their symptoms. Sometimes it is more weight focused. And so I always ask that. And then when it comes to the specific diets, I don't fall into one category. Like, I don't always teach paleo or keto or vegan or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're looking for the tools for that person. But I do think that some of those different diets do have a place. It's
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of using it the right way. And I think for the masses, what a lot of people do is use these for a weight loss focus. And in my opinion, that's not the right tool for that, not the right way to use those. I think paleo in general, it's nothing's wrong with it. Like, it's a real food foundation. It does take out a lot of common inflammatory triggers. So I don't really see concerns with a lot of people doing that. I
Mm-hmm.
do see people take it too far, especially women, when they pull out more and more carbohydrates, especially starchy carbs, healthy fruits.
Mm-hmm.
Same with keto. I see a lot of women who push it too far, and then we see hormone troubles or thyroid troubles from it. And then same with intermittent fasting. All of those can be excellent tools, and for some people, they're what we need to turn to for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that I think a lot of people are using it for a weight loss focus only, and then not realizing the hormonal repercussions that can come from that if used long term.
Right. And actually, it could backfire as far as weight loss because sometimes if you're starving the body or you're not giving the body enough nutrients, it's not able to burn and the metabolism goes down. It can really impact that as well.
100%. And that's where we get the difference between short term and long term. So if you start a new diet and it's new and it's completely different for your body, you'll typically see an initial win. And so this
Mhm.
is what happens with fasting and keto, right? They start it, there's initial progress, maybe weight
Mhm.
loss, and
Right.
if that's their goal, it's really exciting, it's motivating. And then 3 months later, 6 months later, not only has that stalled, but now they're seeing hair loss. Now they're seeing energy lows. Now they're not
Right.
sleeping well. And then when we look into it from a hormone level or even thyroid level or with an assessment or testing, we see what's happened. And that's what people aren't talking about with these diets is, especially for women, we have really sensitive hormones. We cannot tolerate, for most people, the stress and the strictness that comes from some of these diets when
Hmm.
we're doing it for 6 months and hitting the gym hard with lifting and hit workouts multiple times a week and maybe having kids and a job. There's just, our hormones can't handle all that.
Yeah. And another thing, too, I mean, we're addicted to caffeine.
That is another one. Yes. And then
Yeah.
you add in that stimulant as well. And we're just filling this stress bucket, and our hormones end up being like waving the white flag and, sorry, I can't show up for you anymore. And then we're hitting, completely losing your period with amenorrhea, period irregularity, or all sorts of PMS type symptoms.
Right. And we talk about stress and how to deal with stress. It could be obviously using coping skills that we all know are good, sleep, meditation, but food can actually create stress. Just what you're eating can cause stress in your body. That's something that I don't know that a lot of people think about.
Yeah, that's definitely one factor that can add to that stress bucket. And I would say the biggest food category there is just the processed foods. It's hard to go through each ingredient and be nitpicky because there's so many
Mhm.
ingredients out there. I think instead of focusing on all the negative stuff or the harmful stuff, if we really shift our focus to the positive of, let's prioritize real nutrient dense foods, let's learn how to build blood sugar balancing meals and make it more about what we can do versus what we can't do, that
Mhm.
alone is having an impact on our stress load because our brain is focusing on a good outcome versus what not to do, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yes, it does because then people don't feel deprived
Right.
and it makes them more motivated if they're focusing on what to do. Because
Yeah. And with
it's
the
hard to do it the other way.
It is, and that's the thing is when we talk so much about stress strategies, we all know meditation would be good. We all know visualization practices, journaling, breath work, but it's the act of doing it and the habit of doing it. Telling my clients to do that is not necessarily going to work, but
Mhm.
working with their reality and honestly, it's being a coach. It's more than a dietitian at that point. It's helping them structure things in a way that will actually work for their life. And sometimes that's not a daily meditation practice to start with.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense because you really do need to, it's not going to make a difference. If somebody says, do this, do that, that's not necessarily going to impact or really stick. It might stick for a week, but most of the time we know how behavior is. It's so ingrained in us that I think just that aspect of changing in a realistic way is 80% the battle.
Yeah, and that's why, again, I like to focus on the positive of, let's look, even when we talk about their goal, let's focus on what you're wanting to feel like and what you want your health to be like in 90 days versus what you're wanting to get away from. So you're
Right.
really trying to put your mind on the positive, because that truly has an impact on our cellular health.
Yeah, because if you say, don't look at that yellow jacket, what are you going to do? You're going to look at it.
Right. And so many people, even if we talk about weight loss, they're only focusing on what they don't like about their body, or even PMS, what they don't like about their period symptoms. And we
Right.
really have to change that conversation that people have with themselves and about their health and hormones.
That's a good reframe. So if somebody's listening to this and they can't hire anybody and they're wanting to do more for their health and eat right, where do they start?
There is a ton of good information online. To be honest, it's just a matter of finding the professionals and not necessarily reading any random blog article.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a ton of free content that can help you get started. And then in terms of can't afford it, I would encourage people to look at what is the cost benefit, or weigh the pros and cons of not investing in your health, and what is your next year look like if you don't do anything. There are absolutely programs that are small investments that have a ton of information, and then there's higher level things where you're doing testing. You can make hormone progress at any stage, from free content to low investment content to the high end stuff. So I encourage people to just start with what makes sense for you, start doing what you can with what you have, and maybe consider creating a savings for future investments if you need it. But honestly, investing in your health can literally change your life.
It can. And it definitely saves on medical costs, that's for sure.
Yeah, you've heard the saying, you spend now or you spend later, like in the
Yeah,
hospital or in
true.
medications. And I personally can attest to that. I spent plenty on dermatologists, and gosh, I took so much prednisone, I, all the creams, and now all my investments go to food and just my lifestyle stuff.
So I know that we can't obviously generalize, but so you had spoken about your own autoimmune condition, and a lot of women have thyroid conditions, Hashimoto's, that are affecting fertility. We talk about gluten. Like, what is it about gluten that affects autoimmunity so much?
Gluten is one of the foods that we know via research with Dr. Alicio Fasano that the protein in gluten, gliadin, increases zonulin within the gut. So that is something that we know opens up those tight junctures within the gut lining and impacts intestinal permeability or leaky
Hmm.
gut.
Right.
Therefore, you're opening the ability for things you consume, whether that's food proteins or bacteria, pathogens, to then trigger the bloodstream, which is where you're getting more of a systemic immune response. And this is so common for people who feel like whatever I eat, no matter what I eat, I react. And they probably have tried the most strict elimination diets and can't seem to figure out a food. And it's
Hmm.
often because they're looking for the food trigger, when instead we need to be looking at the gut healing component and what is opening those gut tight junctions. And maybe that's actually not food, maybe that's a pathogen issue.
Hmm. So something that they're exposed to.
Yeah, potentially. And then there's other things that impact those tight junctions, including exercise and stress. But that's why I point out gluten. It's just one of the foods that we know in research impacts our gut. And that's not even speaking to the quality of gluten right now and the processing and genetic
Right. And the
modification and
spraying
all
and
of that. Yeah, yeah, which is a huge part of the conversation as well. Not one that I'm as well versed in, but it's a part of the conversation.
And the thing with gluten is that sometimes I'll get people saying, "Oh, well, I don't have it that much." But the thing with gluten is it's an all or nothing kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you're gonna do an elimination diet, do it right the first time and don't
Yes.
half do it where if you're gonna expose yourself once a week, you're still getting that immune response. You're not giving the gut enough time to truly see a difference, which means your symptoms aren't getting enough time. So I would recommend people do at least 4 to 6, maybe longer elimination and truly giving it your all, not only having it a little bit.
Right. So elimination diet, get rid of all of these, the top foods that tend to have high reactivity, such as gluten, soy, corn. You had mentioned nightshades, dairy, among others. And then taking them out for a little while until the symptoms get relieved, and then you add one at a time to see if you're getting sensitive.
That is what an elimination diet is. That is what I did. I don't
Hmm.
necessarily do that with all my clients.
Hmm.
I'm rarely strict like that with clients. And part of that is just my expertise and experience. I'm able to
Hmm.
navigate that food part a bit better with, depending on what their symptoms are and their history is, it can point things out. But I only turn to a strict elimination diet like that if it's really needed and we've
Hmm.
ruled out other things. But oftentimes, most of my clients come to me after already having done all that. They've tried all the things online, they've tried all the things by themselves, they've done every diet possible, and then we're looking at things beyond the food. What is going on? What's the gut bacteria doing? Is there mold impacting the gut? We're looking a bit further.
So you're able to see more specifically, just based on your experience, what certain types of foods tend to do, and also, I guess, the testing that you do to pinpoint it a little bit more, so that people don't have to go through this whole extreme elimination.
Yeah, it's just helping them navigate that food world without having to basically eat lettuce every day and not have variety. Because a huge part of health too is your happiness.
Yeah.
If what we're doing with your diet is creating more stress and stopping you from engaging in social interactions, that's not helping. So we have to look at the full picture. And
Hmm.
yes, with my experience, I might be able to identify based on their diet history, what they've tried so far, how their symptoms are presenting, what foods we might start pulling out. For example, if someone is showing up with cyclical hormonal acne all over the chin each month, I'm going to pull out dairy because that's a very common trigger. Probably pull out sugar as well, just because we know that both of those foods have direct pathways that stimulate sebum in the face or in the skin.
Hmm.
And so that's just an example where we can utilize patterns and food guidance without necessarily being on a really restrictive diet.
Got it. So, ingredients that you had mentioned, dairy and sugar. Obviously, there's also high inflammation. So, if somebody's had high inflammation for a very long time, it also affects their ability to absorb food. So, even if they're eating really well, if they have inflammation, it's going to affect the way that they digest.
Absolutely can, especially if they have pathogens that are also consuming their nutrients or impacting their digestive enzyme production. Maybe they're not breaking things down and absorbing it very well. So that's a big part of it. And I would still want their diet foundation to be solid, but we're also going to be looking at healing the gut.
So typically, I mean, I know this is another general question,
You're good.
but like, how long do you see on average that it takes really for the gut to heal?
Oh, that is a hard one.
I know.
I mean, it that's just so much depends on the case and what their stress bucket's like and what they're willing to implement. And I could
Like if
say,
it's not severe, or I
yeah,
guess a lot of it is, but if somebody tends to have a lot of inflammation and tends to feel the symptoms, but we're not talking about like major celiac or anything like,
right.
yeah.
I mean, from on a spectrum, I've have a client right now who had incredibly horrible reflux and digestive symptoms. And once we started her on her protocol, she specifically had H. pylori and some pathogens. She
Hmm.
noticed within a single week that her reflux was gone. So
Wow,
for
that's great.
that, it happened really quickly. But there
Yeah.
are cases that are taking 3 months to 6 months to a year to
Hmm.
actually get to the root of. So there's just a huge spectrum there.
Yeah. But it's, I'm trying to get the information, but I know it's like so individualized, but I'm trying to make it general so that people listening, could have food for thought, so to speak.
Yeah, and I know when I was going through stuff, any information that gave me hope was helpful. What
Yeah.
was frustrating was being in the doctor's office and being told this is this is just the cards you're dealt. And actually one dermatologist, he wanted me to go tanning, and I said that I have a family history of skin cancer, and he said you're going to have to choose your pros and cons. That is
Why
not
did he
helpful
want you to go tanning?
for psoriasis.
Oh my God.
The sun did help my skin, but that wasn't a root solution.
Yeah.
So that's not helpful. That gives me no hope. But hearing,
Right.
even though I can't give a direct, like, this takes 2 months, I hope people are hearing this thinking, okay, there's a lot I can explore. There's a lot I haven't investigated, and that can be hopeful that there's potentially something, an answer that you haven't found yet.
Absolutely. And the fact that you can heal your body through food and diet, it's a possibility. And to know that, I think that sometimes it's the last place we look, because we go to doctors, we feel a symptom, our first initial thing is to go to doctors if we don't know better.
Yeah, it is absolutely possible to heal with food, diet, or food, lifestyle, mindset, all
Hmm.
of those I know in the beginning I thought that was crazy as well, but now I've just seen it with myself and hundreds of patients.
And it seems to be the simplest. I mean, it's much easier to do that than go to doctor's visits and then get the wrong diagnosis and the wrong medication and side effects and on and
Yeah,
on.
and simple is tricky because it does take lifestyle work. You have to be willing to do the things, which for some is easy, for some
Yeah.
just feels so
Sure.
new and scary. And that's part of having a coach or someone that can help you implement, having a strong community. I mean, those are all aspects that actually get someone to wellness.
And when you work with people, do you ever work with groups or is it one-on-one?
I do one-on-one work and I do group work within my programs. So I have a
Hmm.
program called Energy Upgrade. I have co-created a program called Her Hormones Academy, where we
Hmm.
work with obviously women's hormones. So there are aspects to work in groups, which are the lower price point options for people
Hmm.
who are intimidated with a stronger investment.
Interesting. And how can people find you if they're interested in working with you?
I hang out most on Instagram, which is at Nutrition by Robyn, and that's also my Pinterest page, my Facebook page, my website. That is Nutrition by Robyn with a Y.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is great information. Obviously, it's difficult to ask specific questions because it's such a range, and I get that. We do the same thing. We treat the person, not the symptom. Sometimes it's, you'd love to get the answer of a symptom and know that there's a one-stop shop, but it's just not. It's not the way the body works.
Yeah, it's always a puzzle.
For sure. So I will have all of your information on the episode notes so anybody who's interested can find you. And I thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Michelle. It was great.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.